So in today's video, we're going to cover for loops. This tends to be a topic students struggle with a lot. So let's see if we can't make it a little bit more straightforward. So I'm going to write a for loop first. We're going to see what it does, and then I'm going to start kind of breaking it apart and explaining it step by step. So to write a for loop, we do the following. We say for, open brackets. We define a variable, let's say I, and we set it to some value. We say I less than some other number, let's say 5, and we say I is equal to I plus 1. Then we open curly brackets. And then inside of here, we can write our code that's going to be inside of our for loop. So I'm going to say console.log, and I'm just going to say hi, and I'm going to get a nice emoji to go along with it. Okay, and now when I click run, what we get is the output is hi 5 times, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So what a for loop does is it simply repeats a block of code a certain number of times. So whatever code we put inside of these curly brackets will be repeated. If I put code outside of here, right? So if I say console.log start, and I say console.log end, notice that code doesn't repeat. It is only the code which is inside of these curly brackets which gets run. If I were to put end inside of the curly brackets, then it's going to repeat, and we're going to see high end, high end, high end. This is some high-end code with some high-end banter. Okay, so that kind of explains the basics of what a for loop does. Now, how does it work out how many times to run it? What I'm going to do in order to explain this is instead of printing hi, I'm going to print I. This variable, we defined it, so let's print it out to the screen. I'll hit run. And now when I hit run here, and it updates, we can see this is the output we get. We get 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Because what the for loop is doing is we're saying, okay, start with I is equal to 0. As long as I is less than 5, run whatever code is over here. And every time it finishes running, so when it gets to the end of the for loop, increment I by 1. That's what a for loop is doing. So it will start at 0, and then when it gets to the end, when it gets to the last line, it will increment I to 1. So I is now 1. It will now ask, okay, is I less than 5? It is. So let's run it again. I is now 1, and when it gets to the end, it will increment by 1, so it'll be 2. And this will repeat. Where it becomes interesting is when I is 4, and when it gets to the end now, I will become 5. It will then ask, hey, is I less than 5? It's not, because 5 is not less than 5. 5 is equal to 5, but it's not less than 5. So it will stop running, and we get 4. If I change this to I is less than or equal to 5, notice what happens. And I hit run. When it updates, there we go. Okay, and now we're getting up to 5. So this will run 6 times. If I were to start it at 1, it's only going to run 5 times again because it's going to start at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Whereas this time we're including, we were including 0 previously. So this shows you as well the kinds of freedom or variables that we can control in order to change our for loop. We can change where this starts, right? So maybe instead of starting at 1, we want to start it at 10. And instead of ending it at 5, we're going to end it at 20. Let's run that, see what happens. And now we can see that we're getting from 10, right, all the way to 20. We could change how much it changes by. So instead of changing it by 1, we can change it by 2 every time. And now we should get all the numbers between 10 and 20, but we'll go 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20, etc. The other cool thing is that this doesn't only have to go upwards. We don't only have to increment numbers. We could decrease numbers. So if I start I at 100, and I say, let's go 50, and I'm going to say greater than or equal to 50. So as long as I is bigger than 50, run this code. And every time I'm going to say I is equal to I minus 10. Now when I run that, notice what happens. Oh, please, there we go. We're getting 100 and it goes down, 90, 80, 70, 60, 50, and then it ends. So that shows you the basics of for loops. The mistakes I see students make most often is just in like defining this over here, kind of the syntax. You have to define your variable. You then have to use that variable to compare it to another number, and then you change it by a certain amount. So this doesn't have to be I, it could be anything. We can name it whatever we want. So let's name it X, right? Let's do something weird. Let's call it cat dog, right? Instead, you wouldn't use this, but this is just to illustrate, right? But now we have to update all of these I's to cat dog. So cat dog and cat dog. Whoa, cat dog and cat dog. We can make this a little bit bigger so that it's all on one line. And we're going to get the exact same thing now. It'll be the same thing, we're just using a different variable name instead of this one, instead of I rather. And that's pretty much the basics of for loops. If you're wanting a little bit of a challenge, the thing I'll ask you to do is write a program that calculates the sum of all numbers between 0 and 100. You have to use for loops to do so, but you need to as well understand something about variable scope, local and global. If you're able to write a for loop that can calculate the sum between all numbers 0 to 100, you have a pretty good understanding of for loops.